Guess which of the 5 rice balls was made by his girlfriend? The protagonist randomly took a bite and his expression instantly changed. He painfully spat out the rice ball. There was a silver needle hidden inside. Ever since his parents went on a business trip, his girlfriend had been acting unusually free-spirited. After yesterday's rice ball incident, Rena brought him another bento. This time, she insisted on coming inside to heat it up. The protagonist, too afraid to let her in, quickly lied, saying his mother had already prepared food for him. But Rena saw through his lie instantly. He was clearly eating instant noodles, specifically the pickled beef flavor he had just bought from the convenience store that morning. As his girlfriend, she couldn't allow him to survive on such unhealthy food. After all, not eating vegetables was bad for his health. After shutting the door, the protagonist started gasping for breath and rushed back to his room to call the police. Suddenly, the power went out, and a heavy rainstorm began outside. As he moved to close the window, he saw something that sent chills down his spine. Rena stood in the rain, holding the bento, muttering something over and over. Judging by her lip movements, the protagonist realized she was repeatedly saying, "I'm sorry." He recalled the time when he had first moved to the village. Rena had cheerfully greeted him. To him, she had always seemed like an innocent and naive girl. A single harsh word could make her upset, and a sweet apology afterward was enough to control her emotions. Not only was this naive girl an expert at cooking, but she also had a peculiar hobby. She loved playing in the garbage dump. Of course, to Rena, it wasn't trash. It was a treasure trove. She once found a doll buried deep under the pile and needed tools to dig it out. While she went to get them, the protagonist noticed an old newspaper. The headline read that every year, someone in this village mysteriously died. But when he had asked Rena about any incidents in the village before, she had confidently told him there were none. The protagonist realized that the tools must have been brought by Rena, but he no longer had the mood to dig for the doll. The next day, a police officer came to see him. Another murder had occurred. The victim had died last night during the village's deity festival. The people in this village were strange. If anyone asked about the case, they would simply say that the victim must have angered the gods, and the matter would be left unresolved. Because of this, the police could only question the newly arrived protagonist. After the interrogation, he returned to his classroom to rest. He overheard Rena and her classmates whispering about last night's events. After school, he confronted Rena, asking if she was hiding something from him. But Rena countered by asking if he was hiding something from her as well. She had seen him earlier that day getting into a car and talking to an older man. The protagonist couldn't reveal that he had been speaking with the police, so he had to keep it a secret. Since both of them were hiding something, the conversation ended there. That night, the protagonist received another call from the police. They discussed details of the case, and the protagonist learned something crucial. Before him, another transfer student had mysteriously disappeared, and the seat he was sitting in right now had belonged to that missing student. Just then, his father brought him some tea and snacks. Confused, the protagonist asked why. The answer made his blood run cold. Rena had just visited their house. Not only that, she had gone upstairs. That meant she had overheard his entire conversation with the police. Was she monitoring him? The next day, the protagonist pretended to be sick and took a day off from school. He met the police for lunch, and the officer told him something terrifying. The previous missing transfer student had the same blood type as him. That meant the protagonist was now in serious danger. Additionally, Rena had reportedly been disciplined before. One day, she had smashed all the windows at school. That night, Rena and her little sister brought rice balls for the protagonist. As they were about to leave, the little sister suddenly asked him why he had gone out to eat despite being sick. She questioned why he had traveled to the city for food and even met up with a strange older man. The protagonist picked up a rice ball and started eating, only to bite into another silver needle. The next day, he began practicing baseball. He wanted to train his body and use the bat for self-defense. After school, Rena followed behind him. The protagonist told her to stop following him, but she pointed out that her house was in the same direction. Left with no choice, he let her walk ahead. Rena stopped and suddenly asked him something. Why was he acting exactly like the previous transfer student? That student had also suddenly started swinging a baseball bat all the time. Just as the conversation was getting to the most crucial part, the protagonist anxiously pressed for more details. But Rena simply said the transfer student had transferred schools, and she didn't want the protagonist to do the same. That night, Rena came over again to deliver a bento. Her strange behavior completely drove the protagonist to the edge, shattering the fragile harmony between them. The next day, while the protagonist was swinging his baseball bat, Rena completely ignored him. Instead, her little sister approached and warned him not to imitate the previous transfer student. But the protagonist had no idea what that student had actually done. He brought up some of the village's strange and inexplicable incidents, and at that moment, the little sister suddenly snapped, losing control. After school, the protagonist realized that Rena was following him. In her hand, she was holding a machete. That moment of distraction was all she needed. Within seconds, she was standing right behind him. Her expression was terrifying. The protagonist demanded to know if she was the serial killer behind the village murders. But Rena simply smiled and said that there was no murderer. Everything was decided by the gods. When the protagonist regained consciousness, he found himself back in his room. Rena was sitting beside him, watching over him. Then her little sister walked in. Suddenly, they both burst into laughter. With eerie smiles, they invited him to play a game, one where they would take turns acting as the doctor and the patient. The protagonist suddenly recalled a specific drug used in a past murder case. As Rena's little sister approached with a syringe ready to inject him, sheer panic took over. In that moment of desperation, he unleashed an unbelievable burst of strength, putting all his recent training to use. With ruthless precision, he overpowered both Rena and her sister, turning the tables and killing them instead. But even after escaping, he felt something chasing him, an unseen force that never stopped pursuing. No matter how fast he ran, it was always creeping closer. Meanwhile, the police received a frantic phone call. On the other end, the protagonist stammered about a god hunting him down. Alarmed, the police immediately dispatched officers to the nearest phone booth. The protagonist, still breathless, whispered that no matter how far he ran, the god was always right behind him. "It's here. Right now. Behind me." The officer on the line hesitated. "Turn around and look," he instructed. And then, a blood-curdling scream echoed through the phone. Moments later, they found the protagonist, slumped inside the phone booth, his body drenched in blood. The cycle had repeated.